Okay, hi everybody. My name is Jalen Brown. Today I will be presenting on Ida B. Wells as a crucial figure in the history of investigative journalism. Ida B. Wells was born in 1862 and died in 1931. In this picture, this is her with her aunt and younger siblings. She moved to move with them from the South at a young age. Also, there's a portrait of her, and then there's a plaque of her commemorating her legacy in Memphis, which is where she wrote at the Memphis Free Speech as an investigative journalist, and did a lot of impact work there. So Ida B. Wells was the first of her kind in many ways. She was the first African-American female investigative journalist known at her time, so she pioneered the way for women of color. As well, she was the first African-American female paid correspondent for a mainstream white newspaper. So she was able to tell her experiences and have her experiences authenticated through a white newspaper. And this was kind of rare at the time for women at her age. As well, she was a co-founder of the NAACP. And so she did a lot of work both inside investigative journalism and outside as a civil rights activist. And looking at Ida B. Wells' anti-lynching rhetoric, which is where she mostly spent her time in her writing, she was decrying lynchings in the US. We came up with the research question: was Ida B. Wells a crucial figure in the history of investigative journalism? And we came up with the thesis: Ida B. Wells was a crucial figure in the history of investigative journalism because she debunked the myth that lynchings were justified by Black men serially raping white women. So Ida B. Wells had some revolutionary contributions. The first of which, Wells did not shy away from the facts. In her first 100-page pamphlet titled Red Record, Tabulated Statistics and Alleged Causes of Lynchings in the United States, she pointed out that murder and rape were the two main lynch categories in 1883 and 1884 that Black men were accused of. As Preston King, who was a peer-reviewed editor, points out, murder and rape were two words to excite the deepest anger and therefore attract the greatest support from the white community in opposition against alleged causes of lynchings. So whereas that quotation shows how easy it was for white supremacists at the time to band together and to oppose murder and rape as heinous crimes, Wells points out that where colored men have been lynched on the charge of rape, it was positively known at the time that the relationship between said man and woman was voluntary and clandestine. So many of these relationships were mutual yet covert. So the relationship sustained between them wasn't necessarily rape, or it wasn't rape at all. It was more so white supremacists trying to justify their way of pushing against Blacks and trying to dehumanize Blacks and make them seem like sexual monsters. So their motive was really to subjugate African Americans to fear. And Wells really exposed how much of a stake white supremacy had in the South because of this. In this way, Wells' investigative journalism had an impact. As well, something else to say. Her statistical evidence gave credibility in her writings. Wells featured a lot of total numbers of men lynched, the reasons why they were lynched, and then she would further decry the lynchings and say, this is the real reason why they were lynched. For example, in the People's Grocery that we see over here, white supremacists in Memphis took 3 Black men who were owners of a Black-owned grocery store in the neighborhood, and they lynched them. They lynched them by taking them out of jail and putting them in, and lynching was like a public spectacle, so the whole public came out to see this. And so it didn't just show that the white supremacists took these men from jail, but the police were compliant in taking these men from jail. So it was really all behind the scenes how white supremacists would go and try to take control and subjugate African Americans to fear, and try to distract the public from the truth that white supremacists just wanted to control, and that Black men were not raping white women. As well, Wells took a moral tone and she targeted Christian audiences. There's a specific quotation that Wells concludes in her work from Bishop Haygood, and it states that no race, not the most savage, tolerates the rape of women. Southern people are now and always have been most sensitive concerning the honor of their women. So Wells points out that white men raped black women when black women were slaves, and that narrative became a similar story for black men raping white women. However, it's a misrepresentation. It was a fallacy that white supremacists just wanted to spread to cover up their true motives. And so how this narrative misrepresented black men was really important to debunking the rape myth. It was really important to Wells's work. At the Memphis Free Speech, she increased circulation from 1,500 to 4,000. In Memphis, she increased circulation so much that she had to leave the town because people were afraid of her. People were afraid of her writings. And so her investigative journalism really pushed the frontier for how the public would react to exposing lynchings and exposing the truth behind them. As well, Wells just wanted to end the red record by stating that black men and African Americans in general were moral human beings, and black men were not the sexual predatory monsters that white supremacists made them out to be. And over here we see a picture of the red record, and it was a 100-page pamphlet. It was like one of the first works that she ever wrote. And now we can discuss the decline in lynching. Wells's work had a tangible impact. In the years 1892 and 1895, there were decreases in the amount of lynchings after those years. And part of that occurrence was because Wells's works were published at those times. So it's not a coincidence for sure that when she published her works, the years following, there was a decline in lynchings. So here we see that her works had an actual tangible impact. And that with this tangible impact, she was able to really cover the whole United States and show the whole United States that lynchings were wrong and that black men did not need to be raped for unjustified reasons. In this quotation by Paula Giddings, the decline in lynching after 1892 can be attributed directly to her work. Speaking of Wells, she enacted real change through the use of her assorted writings. In conclusion, there were three major implications of Ida B. Wells's career. The first, she led the way for people of color to make an impact in the field of investigative journalism. As stated before, Ida B. Wells was a black woman writing for a white-owned paid correspondent newspaper, or she was a paid correspondent at the newspaper. And she definitely influenced many women of color to follow her path. There's the Ida B. Wells Foundation that encourages minorities to pursue investigative journalism. There were homes in Memphis built in her name. Unfortunately, those homes were not taken care of correctly and they were taken down, but her legacy was commemorated because she was a pioneer and she was a radical. The second implication, debunking the rape myth, was probably the single most important impact that her work had. Had she not done this, white supremacy would still not be dismantled, and she wouldn't have disgruntled Memphis so much that she would have had to flee. And so it's important to recognize how debunking the rape myth was really at the forefront of her impact as an investigative journalist. And then lastly, she shifted American society's views on investigative journalism, or not on investigative journalism, but on lynchings by forcing them to be vocal about it. Many Northerners would not speak out as much on the evils in the South and the atrocities in the South, and perhaps they weren't paying attention to the real reasons behind these lynchings, but in Wells's work, she definitely allows readers to gain a shock value from her work and really understand what a crisis and what a national epidemic, as she called it, lynchings were. And she said that lynchings were a national problem and they deserved a national remedy. Okay. Thank you for watching.